Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're talking about The Emperor's Club, a 2002 American drama film directed by Michael Hoffman and starring Kevin Kline and Emile Hirsch. And boy, do we have thoughts about this. So I'm going to start with Eli, because you went first. Eli, did you dig The Emperor's Club?
No. Great big resounding no. I read the short story that it is based on, The Palace Thief by Ethan Kanan, who is a faculty at the Iowa Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa. So I read it in my first year freshman class at the University of Iowa, our little gen ed English. And I remember thinking, this feels really familiar, and I like it maybe as a short story, but trying to translate this into a movie, I have so many thoughts.
Yeah. What about you, Christy?
I have not read the short story. I definitely, I got halfway through it this morning, and I was enraged on so many levels. And then I got to the end, and it's the final note wasn't terrible. And I think I'm glad I watched it, because I want, this is giving us an opportunity to talk critically about teaching classics, history, and all of this, which I think is really important. And why am I so angry at this on so many levels? But also the aspect of, I'm a teacher. We're all teachers as well as scholars. And this whole being human and making mistakes in teaching, and how much of an impact that does have. I think that resonated with me at the end. So it was it ended on an almost good note for me, but the rest of it was just infuriating. So I think that's what we'll get into, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I'm about to launch into a sort of a brief kind of summary, because it's probably been either many years since other listeners have seen this movie. This movie came out in 2002, or they may not have ever seen it before, because it's a bit of a forgotten movie. But I have a bit of a weird personal connection with this movie. One of those is we watched this movie when I was in high school. And I feel when I was in high school, we watched and read a lot of stories about prep schools and boys prep schools. I feel like a weird disproportionate amount of my high school education was dedicated. And I went to public school. It wasn't it was pertinent to our experiences. But we're reading a separate piece. And there's a movie with Brendan Fraser where he's at a prep school for WASPs and Dead Poets Society and all these, prep school stories. I mean, I guess Catcher in the Rye sort of is one of these. And we watched this movie, and I remembered this. This is a movie that is, for some weird reason, burned into my memory. And I remembered every single part of it when I was rewatching it this morning, down to the twist and the final reveal at the end. But the other weird connection is I've been to St. Benedict's in real life. Well, it's not St. Benedict's, it's Emma Willard, and it's a private all-girls school in Troy, New York. Really, really close to where I grew up. And I knew people who went there. I have been to Emma Willard on several occasions. So I have been to that campus, and it does look like that. It is picturesque.
It looks pretty. Yeah.
It is gorgeous. It is a Hogwarts castle. Anyways, like Christy was saying though, I liked the movie a little bit more at the very end. I have a lot of thoughts about the nature of teaching the classics in this movie, pedagogy, and education in general. And this is a very kind of pertinent movie, I think, right now, because we're having a lot of sort of self-reflection in our field. But just to get sort of listeners in, a quick sort of plot summary. So the first 2/3 of the movie are set in 1976 or something like that. So an all boys, super elite boarding school. And Kevin Kline is a teacher of, I guess, Roman history. And every year they have a contest, the Julius Caesar contest, where it's a trivia contest of Roman history and stuff. And Emile Hirsch is one of the new students, and he's the son of a senator, and he's a troublemaker and a loudmouth and a clown. But Kevin Kline manages to get through to him a little bit, and he starts applying himself, and he almost makes it into the final for this contest. And then Kevin Kline kind of fudges it at the end to get him into the final three to be in the contest. But then he finds out that he cheats. And then we have a fast forward to about 30 years later in 2000, and Emil Hirsch's character has grown up. He's now like a rich businessman or something, and he redoes the contest, and then Kevin Kline catches him cheating again. And that's kind of the movie.
Yep.
So, where to begin?
I feel like we could almost sort of separate this maybe into themes, but maybe they're too intertwined. So I'm thinking of like the entire overarching teacher-student relationship, pedagogical, like dealing with students who don't want to learn, maybe? Question mark? I have a big question mark on that. But also just like dealing with cheating, which is something that I feel like I have really had in my brain this week, dealing with my own students cheating. And then like separate from that also is maybe this theme of like the importance, question mark in quotes, of the classics, and like why is he a classics professor? And like, what is
a question that's just, what is the school's curriculum? Because it seems that like all they ever do in this school is study like trivia of Roman history and with a little bit of Latin thrown in, which I'm like, I'm professionally invested in teaching the classics, but do they have like math class? I don't know. We never see it. It seems to be this entire boarding school is entirely dedicated to just knowing everything there is to know about the Roman Empire.
That being said, I would be pumped for that contest. Like, I would be, oh yeah. I love trivia. So like, and trivia of like the ancient Mediterranean world, I'm like, yes, bring it.
Did you, because I imagine you found yourself like me when we were watching the actual trivia portions of it, when you was like, which of these emperors is not in the list? And I went, Claudius, it's Claudius. And I'm like shouting out the answers at my TV.
Yep, I definitely yelled the answers at my TV the whole time, which was...
I mean, that was the thing. It's like, I love trivia. I hate teaching to trivia because like, that was just it, is all of this just became about the like, most of the questions are about the emperors, like all the leaders. And it's like, there's so much else going on in the world that like,
this is one of my first notes, was like the kind of Kevin Kline's whole shtick is like, I am teaching you about the great men, emphasis on men, of history, so you can be great men, just men. And and it's pure like this. Kevin Kline's whole like pedagogical, his whole ethos is really like doubles down on like, I guess what we would call great man history, right? Where like the study of history is just studying the achievements and accomplishments of individually exceptional men, capital M.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that sort of move the needle of history, which I think even in 2002 was a bit I mean, I know that the movie is set in 1976, but...
But one of the girls says, duh. That was... Yeah. Like, wait, that's 2000s right there. I thought we're in the 70s.
Right?
Yeah.
But no, I did really notice that too, where he was like, these are the great men, the contributors to history. And I'm like, well... what did Julius Caesar contribute to Gaul but genocide? Like, what are we idolizing here by calling these the great men of history? Which is a facet and a feature of like old school classics learning. Yeah. And it's something that I think the field has been trying to unlearn and step away from for the past 30 years.
At least. And I mean, in that sense, it is, I guess, kind of true to the period that in 1976, I imagine you could probably expect to get a sort of lecture like that, maybe.
Yes.
But it seems to me that the movie sort of seems to accept that at face value as like, this is the purpose of education and also of learning the classics, which... also is going to lead me to my other big point, which is justice for Šutruk-Nakhunte.
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, that infuriated so much because it wasn't a matter of like, he didn't contribute anything. It's like, I'm going to curse so much today. Bullshit. Like, it's just like, oh, no, it's because he is a sovereign of what we call today the Middle East, the Alam.
Context. Yeah. So, I guess Kevin Kline's character has been teaching this class basically for like 30 something years. And his opening move, like, because some teacher, I don't know if you two do this, but you have like kind of an opening. I haven't really done enough classes repeatedly to be able to like figure this out, but like your big sort of like opening gambit. And his is, he makes a student read this plaque in the background that is, it's about this guy, I am like Šutruk-Nakhunte, the king of Elam, and I did blah, 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 blah. And he's like, have any of you ever heard of Šutruk-Nakhunte? And they're all like, no. It's like, that's because he didn't contribute anything to history. And
shit.
Yes. And as Christy was just saying, I think it's not that I don't think he necessarily contributed any more or less than maybe Julius Caesar. It's just Julius Caesar was a Roman. And so we give him a little bit more.
An entire trivia contest of which people spend millions of dollars.
And also, if you're going to name a trivia contest after a Roman, Julius Caesar he wasn't like he was known for, I mean, he was a smart guy and very well read as far as we can tell, but like he wasn't like trivia master or, I don't know. I feel like Mr. Cicero would have been although I guess, but then you know what? Julius Caesar works because for these boys, learning is all about conquering. So like, I guess it tracks.
I'm making so many faces, you guys. Like, it's,
I know.
Just a little, because I wrote down this note. Actually, Šutruk-Nakhunte, real guy. He was king of Elam from 1184 to 1155 BC, and that inscription actually that they read is more or less. There's an actual like victory stele. You can find it on Wikipedia. It's actually cool as hell if you looked at the picture.
Yeah, the picture's really cool.
Yeah, and it's got a like a picture of like all these like guys fighting, and then in the top right corner in cuneiform is this little inscription that says, "I am Šutruk-Nakhunte, beloved servant of the god in Shushana, king of Ansham and Susa, and I did this," which is also like a lot of Near Eastern kingdoms, and like analytic history reads a lot like that. Like I took a Hittite course in grad school, and it's like, I am Shulupa Uma, and I like took this many men, and I conquered the Gaskins, and then we went to this city. But so but he says it's like nobody, like you'll never hear about Šutruk-Nakhunte in a history book, and I'm like, well, where did you hear about him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like, what history book are you reading, and who has written that history book? And, why was that history book written? There's so much of our history that I think has been, like, funneled into, like, this determinism of, oh, we talk about this so much because it's so important. But it's just what old white British men wanted to talk about, and that's why we think it's important.
And it's also that we've talked about this sort of at length a little bit of, like, this sort of false narrative that's been a thing since basically the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, constructed of like there was Greece and then there was Rome and then there was Western Europe. And it's like, that's the line. And it completely sort of elides, like, for example, the importance that like the Islamic world played in sort of transporting these texts, or the way knowledge flows, the way ideas sort of flowed between Europe and North Africa and the Middle East, and then further east and south and things like that. And like, not that Greece and Rome aren't sort of foundational in many ways, but sort of making them that they are like these exceptional, exclusive, like the Greek miracle, we would call it.
Yep.
Well, and it was so interesting because one of the opening shots of him setting up his classroom for the new semester, and the textbook placed on is like ancient Mediterranean history, and I was like, wow, that's really that's what I want to call my history classes that are Greek and Roman oriented. Like, I want to broaden it out. And then it's like, all right, we're going to acknowledge the Greeks are somehow involved there. But then it goes straight to all Roman and almost all Roman political military. And it's just like, that is the pipeline I absolutely hate. So.
Yeah, I had the same thought because even today, I feel like we very much sort of push out or kind of forget to include the fact that North Africa and the Middle East are a part of Mediterranean history in a big way. And we, don't ever seem to really connect those dots. And I do think that the field is trying so much to be better, and especially to step out of that great man history. And it felt very jarring to watch this movie and just see that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, even also, like, so the first scene we were joking about in the beginning, like the first sort of pedagogical moment we get from Kevin Kline is a young, first of all, I guess we should ask, this movie is a weird who's who of child actors who will blow up. And so, because we encounter a young Jesse Eisenberg.
Who has the best glow up of all of them.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
True. Yeah.
Jesse Eisenberg is played by Patrick Dempsey, which is a statement. If somebody looked at a teenage Jesse Eisenberg, I'm like, I see a young Patrick Dempsey in that guy. The kind of like that cool, casual handsomeness that Patrick Dempsey exudes. Jesse, that's what I get. Not a nebbish, awkward.
Yeah, I was like, I couldn't place who Patrick Dempsey was supposed to be for the longest time until the contest. I'm like, that's who he's supposed to be.
This is one of those weird accidents where, like, the film, I mean, 2002, like, we didn't know that Jesse Eisenberg was going to be as big of a deal as he would end up being, or that Paul Dano.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, you know, they're just like kid actors. They're all like they're all teenagers. I think Emil Hirsch would have been like 17 when this movie came out. So he was probably like 16 or 15 when they filmed it. So yeah, funny in retrospect to think that this movie is predicting that Jesse Eisenberg is going to grow up into Patrick Dempsey. But anyways, the first like pedagogical moment that Kevin Kline has is he encounters like Jesse Eisenberg is like running across the quad, and Kevin Kline's basically like, stay on the path, walk the path that others that walked before you, which I was like, just that beat where I was like, that is... We're all kind of sighing. Like,
I know. It was cringeworthy. It really was.
Let's like remain in the status quo, right?
Yeah.
It's like the way that things are the way they're supposed to be, which means white and male, right?
Yep.
Which when you like lay that over the whole like Roman history, and because it really feels that like I'm training you boys to like be the next Cicero and the next Julius Caesar and the next whoever, putting these men literally up on pedestals. And, you know, when, like Eli said, like Julius Caesar, you know, waged an illegal war to escape his debtors and lined his own pockets and built his sort of political career on like the blood of Gaul. And Cicero, I mean, you know, was a good public speaker, but also maybe kind of a dick. But
well, and like one of the lines towards the end, I forget who they were quoting, but it was when he was opening the textbook he'd given.
Yeah.
Forever ago. And like two of the lines from it that like it was conquer giants and then show mercy once we've conquered. And I'm like, that's paternalistic benevolence. It's awful. Why are we like, and then like they just have such a look of awe. And I'm like, no, question this.
Yes. Which is okay. We're going to bring this to one of my pedagogical. We're good. Oh my god, I cannot words. It's Friday and I'm so tired. Okay, when Emil Hirsch joins the class and he's sort of very much from the beginning just like kind of a dick student who's just like doesn't want to listen, and it's like we've all had those students, we've all met those students, like what, like fine,
I've never had an Emil Hirsch level of the student.
I mean he was,
that's because it's high school and college students are paying for the pleasure to sit through our classes, and if they don't want to get their money's worth.
I've never taught high school, and I'm sure that is a completely different thing. Teaching college is, I treat them like adults because they are.
Yeah. And like particularly like teaching a bunch of young Brett Kavanaughs.
Exactly. No, it sounds horrific and terrible. But when they read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and
why?
Whatever.
I kept having flashbacks to the Mean Girls where it's like, we should totally stab Caesar.
Well, it's like he's Brutus, right?
Yeah.
Emil Hirsch is Brutus, and he like doesn't want to read it because he's like, I don't agree. He's like, I think their plan is stupid. I'm like, that is like an opening. That is an opportunity to have your students debate, to have them talk, to actually engage them with the material and not be he was such a dick about it. Kevin Kline was like, oh, so what? He doesn't agree with the way Shakespeare has written an ancient Roman character? Like, of course not. Like, this is the stupidest argument to have, and sent up so many red flags for me.
Oh, that moment killed me in connection with the sidewalk thing, because it really... Have either of you watched Abbott Elementary at all?
No.
Highly recommend. It is about elementary school in Philadelphia. And like it's the same thing of like, how do you effectively teach? And a guy was struggling, and he's like a substitute teacher, and he's struggling like to like get students to focus on math. So he's asking a question. It's like, all right, Farmer Brown has 5 turkeys and he gives 2 away. How many turkeys does he have? And an elementary school kid raises his hand and says, and actually asks, is one of the turkeys pregnant? And I'm like, that's a legitimate question. And so he's telling the other teachers this in like the break room, and they're like, yeah, that's a great question. Answer it. And then keep going, because it just, the fact that our public schools do shut down curiosity. And like by the collegiate level, it's like I have students apologizing to me for asking questions. I'm like, you don't have to apologize. You really don't. And then I see this and it's like, this is why students feel like they have to apologize for asking a question, because that was a legit question. That was a legit critique of, hey, this doesn't seem like a great plan. And Kevin Kline's just offended that it's like, but good men question whether or not assassinating someone is for the greater good or butchery. And I'm like, it's still murder.
Well, Sedgwick's angle is that Brutus should have also murdered Mark Antony and like
yeah.
You know, because like he's a threat and he's gonna be a problem for us later. So like I should be I'm Brutus and I want to be, you know, king or whatever. And then Kevin Kline's like, but Brutus doesn't want to be king because he's good. And this is all I think trying to set up that, you know, because Sedgwick his dad is this senator who we can probably infer is corrupt. And Sedgwick is at the end of the movie is running for Senate and will probably be a corrupt senator.
Side note on that. If the worst thing a senator has ever done is cheated on a history trivia game.
Yeah, you're right. I would accept it. I would make my peace with that.
Yeah.
I guess the thesis is the cheating on the history trivia game is a bellwether for just general, you know, moral depravity. Like fair. Who else, you know, this sure. Sedgwick's going to be on monkey business.
Well, I think it was weird sort of trying to like align the good quote unquote like good characters who like studied and who were like into it with people like Caesar and Augustus and Cicero. And I think of how they described Cedric Bell, Emile Hirsch's character, sort of later after he doesn't win his first Mr. Julius Caesar contest. They said that he had this like, you know, hypnotic charisma around his peers, that he, you know, pushed back against authority. And I'm like, all of those things that you say about Cedric Bell, like people said about Octavian. Like he had this weird charismatic quality. He was kind of a dick.
Or Alcibiades.
Or Alcibiades. I'm like, these are the great men that you're talking about. They don't give a shit about cheating. I'm like, what would Mark Antony do? What would Julius Caesar do? They wouldn't give a shit if they cheated on an exam.
Yeah.
Like he is the through line, right? Like he is the through line of your Roman senator. And it just infuriates me.
At the very end, when Kevin Kline's being helicoptered away, he says, like, as a student of history, like, I know that Sedgwick will probably have, like, a successful career, you know, something. He says something to the effect that it's like, having studied history, I know that men like Sedgwick tend to get ahead in life.
Because he's Augustus. Because he's
exactly. Case in point, Augustus.
Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to that point of, like, walking the sidewalk that everyone else has walked before. You don't make a name for yourself, good or bad. And like and then that was what he ran into him for himself when he was trying to go up for headmaster. Is like, I've done everything right that I was supposed to, and you're not giving me the job because I don't know how to schmooze.
So there's a scene towards the end where the old headmaster dies and Kevin Kline's like, great, I'm next up for headmaster because I've put in my time, you know, and I am the most senior person here. And then the board basically informs him, no, we're giving it to this younger guy who like has ideas and like knows how to fundraise and like thinks progressively is what I can assume. And Kevin Kline is like, this is an outrage. I am, you know, tendering my resignation. And then I wrote in my notes, I'm like, no, I would have given it to that other guy. Like he sounds like Kevin Kline's way is the way of tradition, which is the way that leads to programs getting shut down. But
yes. No. And his sort of this I'm now resigning kind of thing is like, was that going to be your contribution? Like listen to your own lectures, right? Like, are you just after the glory? Do you want to be Augustus, or do you think that you're just Šutruk-Nakhunte? Or like, it was his own like position in history that I think is kind of funny.
There's a part where Sedgwick's dad, he has a meeting with Cedric's dad, the senator, and the senator says, it's like, so like, what's the point of like what you teach? And Kevin Kline's like, isn't it obvious? Or what, you know, or I forget exactly what he says, but he's like, oh, I'm like molding the character of your son. And and that's such like in some ways, like it's an answer that, I mean, not just classics, but a lot of like that kind of like because every other month or something like that, the news, sort of like why we need the classics or the humanities or liberal arts or whatever it is. And there's such a tendency to fall back on the same kind of like they teach, character or critical thinking or, this like, and it's like the same kind of wool that gets kind of spun out very often. Like that line that Kevin Kline delivered in presumably 1976, people were wheeling out in 2000, and even today, people will occasionally. And it's like I'm losing my train of thought on where I want to go.
Well, and he tried to also form the response to the senator's position. Is like, well, our entire government is based upon what the Greeks and Romans did. It's like ours. And one thing I get really mad about in terms of we're building upon the systems of the greats is like those systems failed. And they weren't a true democracy. They weren't we built our system on failed systems. Yay us!
And like Athens is, Athens as a democracy was one kind of short-lived. It was a sort of brief but glorious thing. It was short-lived. It ended in a sort of long, protracted war, and in which they committed war crimes and did, a mob rule took over, and there was all sorts of political infighting. And Rome's Republic similarly got like bogged down in political partisanship, and then which devolved into civil war, which then turned into an absolute monarchy. So,
yeah.
I mean, the idea was like, I guess like there's like the word that's missing is like, I think it is good to study the systems upon which our system is modeled and inspired, but like the missing word is critical.
Yes.
We need to study these things like critically. Think about like what are they, in which ways, like are there, because let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like there's good ideas and just also it's just kind of interesting, just as a purely like from like a voyeuristic standpoint. It's just kind of like interesting to like learn about these like all the weird stuff that happens, and it's all
absolutely
wild and wonderful and like kind of cool. But like to think with an eye of like this wasn't the end all be all of civilization.
Yeah.
Which Kevin Kline seems to. Well, I keep saying Kevin Kline like he, is this man.
Well, based on the trivia notes you put down, he almost felt a lot like, I mean, he had that upbringing, right?
He did go to a school that was very similar to this one, where, funnily enough, Emil Hirsch went to a public school in LA, like a big public school.
Good for him. I asked Nick what he remembered about this movie, because when I told him I was watching The Emperor's Club, he just goes, oh. And he basically just remembered like the plot-ish and the fact that a girl at the girls' school like almost takes her top off.
Yes, a few of them do.
And that was, but that is what stood out about this movie years later.
Okay, I watched the preview before watching it with Andy, and it's like, this looks like a Dead Poets Society knockoff, like hardcore.
It is, and it also is like the antithesis, right? Because Dead Poets Society is all about like don't color within the lines, don't stay in the lane, get up on your desk, like. Poetry is not
the pages out of your book. Yeah.
God. But yeah, like, the whole thing is Robin Williams and Dead Poet Society is like use art to like, find your truth or whatever, creative expression. That's what it's all about. Like rebel against authority, break away. Whereas Kevin Kline in this one, who kind of physically reminisces Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. Like he does kind of look like him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kevin Kline is all like, do what all of the other men have done before you.
I mean, like, which is almost more realistic because the group he is speaking to is like, because it has worked for us. Yeah. Don't rock the boat, people. This is the waspiest school ever. And, these are all like, we get the idea that this is like, all these are like the sons of senators and congressmen and business leaders or whatever, and lawyers, and like, these are all, this is the 1% that are being groomed to be the 1%. And that one Indian kid who is smart.
Well, I wrote in my notes, Deepak was going to win anyways. Like he just won on his own merits and he was great.
Which I appreciate. At least they did that.
Yeah. His adult version is played by Rahul Khanna, who is like a big time Bollywood actor and almost didn't take this role because he thought it was going to be too small time for him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was pretty small time for a big time Bollywood actor,
He
but
gotta wear a toga.
Because I guess like I mean, the idea is like not to like maybe to get to the end. The kind of thesis of this movie is like Kevin Kline is like, I have failed. He really was investing a lot of his chips in Sedgwick, and like Sedgwick turning out to be a cheat and to be morally flawed breaks Kevin Kline a little bit.
Mhm.
And he kind of considers himself a failure as an educator because of this failure of a student. But then at the
which
end,
I think is bullshit.
yeah.
We'll come back to that. I want to put a pin in that.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
then at the end, all of the students kind of rally around Kevin Kline, and he's like, "Oh yes, I had all these other students who turned out excellent." Paul Dano's character, who he kind of screwed over a little bit, because he gave Paul Dano's spot to Emil Hirsch to be in the contest. Although I want to come back to that decision because
that moment's important to discuss as educators.
Yeah, I have thoughts about it. And but Paul Dano like turned out to be a great guy. As his son comes in later, and Deepak, also the actor, the real actor's name is Rishi Mehta, and his character's name is Deepak Mehta. So I don't know if they just happened to have the same last name or if the screenwriters were just like whatever.
It does happen sometimes that like
yeah. But anyway, he was always smart and he was great. And, he was intellectually curious because we have a scene where he's reading up on the Carthaginians and Kevin Kline's like, "Oh, we're not studying the Carthaginians." And he's like, "I know." And Kevin Kline's like, "Excellent work." And like in all of his efforts in Sedgwick were kind of, he kind of missed that he had all these other fantastic students, which are like his real legacy.
Which is like, I feel like the sort of pull of the anti-hero, right? He's like the super charismatic, I don't know.
In a different movie, Sedgwick's character in like Footloose, he's Kevin Bacon, right? He's the disruptor. Exactly. He comes in and he's like, screw being dorks all the time. Let's steal a canoe and row across the lake to meet girls or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's the audience is rooting for him.
Well, this movie frames as like a sign of his moral, what's the word?
And there's it's so interesting with his character that the part with his father, like I get cheating as that kid. I totally do.
Yeah.
It does not surprise me at all. And the moment he shares talking about like finally maybe having an opportunity to have a real conversation where his dad hears him, and his dad dies the minute he starts speaking. He's like, that was just emblematic of my entire life. And you do get these shots of him with his kids that shows that like he's invested, he cares about his kids the way that his dad never did.
Yeah.
And then like the heartbreaking moment that we're supposed to come to in the bathroom when Kevin Kline confronts him about cheating again. He's like, "Well, I get away with it and this is how you win." And then his son comes out looking so disappointed in him. First of all, I don't know that the son would be that disappointed at that age. But
so the son didn't wash his hands after the restroom. This is the thing that I always, whenever there's a bathroom scene, I always am mentally clocking whether or not the character is washing their hands after they use the bathroom. And you would be surprised. I mean, I get why, because like you don't want to like, it's probably hard to like film and like the faucet and it kills the flow. But like you'd be surprised how rarely characters in movies wash their hands after they use the bathroom. Okay.
Also, I was also wondering if a boy that age, is he gonna wash his hands? I don't know.
The kid's gonna go and like handle finger foods and put them back on the freaking tray.
Oh my god!
But that was the thing is like maybe he's going to see the impact he has on his child, but it's like he's already done so much better than his father. He's not gonna give a. He's just not like.
Yeah. I don't know if that child that young would have understood really like the depth of that conversation.
What I was actually hoping for, like when the one kid who showed up late, I was hoping this would be a few years afterwards, and like this was actually Emil Hirsch's kid.
Yeah,
like my dad, I'm here to learn, and then you learn it's the other guy's kid.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Kid.
But it could have been just like a little bit better, like a little more of a cherry on top.
Yeah, but here's my sort of maybe counter argument, or I guess because in that situation, like I see where you're coming from, but that situation, it still kind of becomes about Sedgwick again, because it's like, here's my chance to redeem myself with Sedgwick's scion.
Right.
And with Paul Dano's character, it's like, you were always a fantastic student and I never really gave you your due diligence. Because I was so kind of invested in trying to redeem Sedgwick, or, I was so invested in Sedgwick that I kind of ignored that I had an already fantastic student in Paul Dano. And now his son's here, and presumably his son will be also a fantastic student.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like the redemption doesn't have to come through at that point.
And because the idea is there's always going to be dudes like Sedgwick, and they're going to have sons. Yeah. They're going to have future Sedgwicks, maybe. Also, I mean, I'm surprised that kid didn't get bullied more for being named Sedgwick, but
right.
While we're on Paul Dano, let's talk about the sort of critical, moment, the choice moment for Kevin Kline's character, where he's getting, he's been working with Emil Hirsch, with Sedgwick, and his grades are improving. He's doing better. He's getting invested. He's applying himself, which is, like the wet dream for any teacher. And, then he gets to the final tabulation, and there's basically a 1 point difference between the top 3 spots between Paul Dano and Emil Hirsch. And he fudges the grade a little bit to give Sedgwick that 3rd spot. Whereas that's kind of devastating because Paul Dano's character, his dad won it back in the day. So he was he was kind of devastated by not getting it.
I was going to say, one of the things that is very true in that moment to Kline's character is the fact that he didn't think of just having them tie and have 4 people compete.
Right? That was the exact thought that I had.
They did that for the spelling bee. The National Spelling Bee had ties. Why couldn't he? And that's just it. It's why is he the only one in charge of assessing who gets to be in this contest?
This is the school's biggest tradition, and it seems to exist entirely in this dude's classroom. Yeah. And I had this exact same thought where I was like, well, you could be like, look, there's 4 really deserving students, because it's also the way he was tabulating it was the top 2 spots. So Jesse Eisenberg and Deepak Mehta, where they were 104, 103, and then there was a 10. I made note of this. Then there was a 10-point gap to 3rd place, and then it was a 93 and a 94, and then I don't know what the rest were. And he could have just been look, there's 4 students this year that are deserving. And the real answer is because they didn't say this outright, but you can see it in the memorabilia and stuff. But the contestants are triumvirs, so it's so we need 3.
But there were 4 emperors when they split up the whole thing. Come on, new traditions.
Also, you have duumvirs or quattrovirs or seivirs, as magistrates of different towns,
My overly extra solution would have been, okay, in the second triumvirate, there were the 3 triumvirs, but there was also a Sextus Pompey, who was the secret 4th. He was the secret 4th triumvir.
I love it.
So we have the special spot, and I would make it an overly elaborate contest, but there's the Sextus Pompey gets extra rules and weird. It gets there's weird handicaps and bonuses that are being added, but.
That would be incredible. I would love that. But no, it's he's staying the path, right? He's doing the exact same thing that everybody else has done before. There has always been 3, so there has to be 3, and there can be no exceptions.
But this is if I were in that position as an educator, I probably might have made the same choice as Kevin Kline, where you have to kind of weighing all things. Paul Dano, we understand, is a great student and will continue to be a great student, regardless of the Julius Caesar contest. Whereas with Sedgwick, if he gets into this contest, that's a huge, potentially pivotal moment. And it's not the grading of their short essays is the hardest, at most absolute science. And there was a 1 point, at the end of the day, there was a 1 point difference between the 2. And so I've definitely gone over and their students were I really want them to do well, or even for many students, I feel even just getting positive affirmation can do so much.
Absolutely.
I think that's just that moment I connected with as an educator, because it was a recognition that as educators, we are not objective. We are cognizant of other factors than just what is put in front of us. What are the circumstances? What do I know to be the efforts of this individual? And
then their circumstances, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I'm if this is a contest that is well known throughout the school, it should not be a single person, because no one is objective, but at least amongst a group, you can hold some accountability to it. And I think that was, he just put himself in such a bad position to begin with of making that call that I totally understand and get as an educator. Yeah. But when it comes to this, if it's a matter of a student's grade and the effort and that's the reward for themselves, you do that. But when it's, especially because I don't know that he was aware, but no, he knew his father's history. He knew that kid's father
Yeah.
had won
He
it
was
before.
totally, he met with the father. He totally, like,
Yeah.
after his meeting with the father, he's like, I get it. Your father's an asshole.
Oh, I meant the other guy who he
Oh.
like
No, I think he
Caldano.
knew. He knew.
he did know. Yeah, he did know that his father had won before, because when they go to see the Julius Caesar statue, it's like, oh, I believe your father was one. It's like, can you point him out? And so he knew that it was a legacy thing. And like at this school, legacy, everyone knows what it means to be a legacy. Like that also should have been a consideration of how impactful that decision was going to be on both individuals. And again, the obvious solution to me was, all right, we'll just have 4 people this year. Like,
I mean, there's only one winner. Why can't there be 4 finalists?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I agree, Colin. I feel the pull of like making that A- that A+, and like the sort of like encouragement that you could give to a student who hasn't maybe felt that before, who hasn't been excited about doing something learning based before, who's just gotten interested and like wants to succeed, maybe for the wrong reasons, maybe for the right reasons. Like who cares? Like it's wanting to take care of your students, and I totally see that.
Can I connect that to another moment that to me also really resonated with the struggle I have as an educator, is when Sedgwick is going to the librarian and asking for a book. And the librarian is adamant, I am being fair to all students by holding everyone accountable to these same regulations. And then this white professor guy steps in. I was like, well, I'm vouching for him. And I'm like,
doesn't matter.
That does, like, there, it's like, not saying that okay, sorry.
The feelings.
There should be a level of objectivity in terms of like, I want to be fair to all of my students. And so I have to hold a particular, like, you have to hold the line somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, if you can incorporate all like, that's the question we have about accessibility of a course too. Like, how do I, instead of giving special exceptions to students because they come to me with a letter of accommodations, how can I design my course so that that is not necessary? It meets the needs of all students. And like, that's what we're really striving towards. But like, speaking up, vouching for one student to actually give them the advantage in this, even if it's meant to encourage, I don't agree with that choice. And like, I understand why the librarian is upset. Like, I totally get that feeling.
100%.
Yeah. So I wanted to connect those two moments because it was such a weird, like, on the one hand, yes, I agree of encouraging through that, giving him this chance to compete in the trivia, but at the same time, by giving him a resource that no one else has access to in the same way is problematic.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. No, I think about the graduate exams that
I have a story that Eli, you go first.
Well, no, I think about, there are certain books in the library that are earmarked for, these are on graduate comp exams. Therefore, they have a 2-hour checkout window.
Yeah.
Where you can take them to your office for 2 hours, but you have to bring them back. Or they have an in-library use only. So you can sit in the library and you can read them however long you want, but you have to leave them there because the same 24 hours, like, your other cohort members are going to come looking for the same book. And it's the same thing. It's like, you can't just check out a book and then, like,
there was
none of your others.
So a little bit of context. When I did my comp exams, the way it worked for me was we had one of the sort of parts of the comp exam was basically like a commentary where we would get some passages of Latin text or Greek text, actually. But the incident in question happened with the Latin exam. And so normally, like, the professors will try to, like, they will put these books on, like, exactly like Eli was saying, like, course reserve, 2-hour, like, in library only. The idea being, like, you go in, you scan the sections you need, and then you walk out. Or whatever. But like for the exact, like, so, everybody has equal access. There was a sort of incident. So like we got the exam for the Latin in question on like a Thursday or a Friday. And one of the sections was a passage of Tacitus. And there was like one very big, very important Tacitus commentary that was in the library, and it was checked out. And we were all like, all of the other, like, there was like, 6 other grad students with me, and they're like, who the they're like, did you check it out? I didn't check it out. Did you check it out? And we tracked it down. We figured out who had it. It was I'm gonna bleep this out later.
Yeah, okay. I knew who it was, but
and we were like, we know who has it checked out. We all because we only have like the weekend basically, and like we all need to like get access to this fucking book. And some students, this is also again I think good and bad graduate students, is some graduate students are real fucking champs where they got the book first and they scanned a bunch of the sections and just emailed everyone. And they're like, here's all the chapters. Yeah. And we were like, thank you. But there was a moment where like there was like a Friday afternoon and we were like banging on this kid's office. Everyone was texting him. We're like, where the are you? Where the fuck's the Tacitus commentary? I'll kill you. And then in the passage of Tacitus was like, I'm going to create desolation and I'm going to call it peace, which is actually the section in question we had to do a commentary on. But
oh my god,
that was a deep cut nerd joke for all you Tacitus fans out there. I'll be with you all night. This is DJ Smooth. Okay.
Well, and that goes back to this idea of accessibility in terms of when you create a competition like this, you either cannot give the advantage to anyone, but the better solution is like give the advantage to everyone. Like be the student who takes the book and scans a PDF for everyone so that everyone has access to it. Because like I remember one of my professors as an undergrad telling me stories about how funding in certain departments, how exams, like they're so competitive that grad students will actively hide books.
Yes. This
from
was
each
thing.
Other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what bullshit is that?
I have heard stories of this. Fortunately, never experienced it myself, but of like, same. I mean, this is to going back to, we were talking about like why Sedgwick cheats. And this is like a system which is so rooted in like competition and excellence and top 5 or something that is like very much a system that's going to encourage that kind of behavior. It's going to encourage cheating. It's going to encourage sabotaging others, where like there can only be 3 people past the post. So, not only do you have to like do whatever you can to get yourself out in front, but like sabotage those who might get there before you.
Absolutely.
Which is a deeply unhealthy academic climate.
Oh, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, because the goal is like everyone should learn. Not everyone should win. Like that's not what learning is.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the same kind of stuff you hear about like people who create courses that are meant to weed out the weaklings. And I'm like, that just tells me you're a bad teacher, that you can't make this material accessible to every student who comes to you. And I'm not saying like people who have students who fail despite best efforts, like that's on you. But if you are intentionally setting it up that way, you're not an educator, in my humble opinion.
To the pin that I put earlier on sort of Kevin Kline saying that he had like failed Sedgwick in some way. I like felt a visceral like reaction to that. I was like, hell no, he made his choices. He was an adult for half of this movie and he made choices. He doubled down on the choices that he made as a teenager. And like none of that is your fault. And I think there is so much on like what is it, like high school teachers who have like how much of your class is passing or like how much of the high school is graduating or something like that. It's like part of it is structural society and the economic institutions that keep our students from succeeding, and it is no fault of our teachers.
I will say like what I connect with in that description, though, it's the same as reading reviews at the end of the semester, is like you could have 19 glowing reviews, but that one long negative comment about your class is what sits with you for years.
Of course it does. Yes.
And so I got the I understood the sentiment for sure.
Yes,
and
I do agree.
I maybe felt more guilty about like what had happened in 1976 and my role in it, because even Sedgwick coming out, it's like, why didn't you call me out? Were you afraid of my dad too? Like, it's like, I could have felt some things that I would have felt guilty about. But once he's a grown man who's paid millions of dollars out of pocket to recreate the whole thing just to cheat again.
Again.
That's him. That's all him at that point.
All
I
him.
did also. I empathized with the silent character of the grad student who we paid a couple $100 to speed in answers. I would have taken that gig in a freaking. Like, can you imagine people coming through the listserv? It's like
that would have been me.
Eccentric billionaire hosting Roman trivia contest. Need grad student to like help feed answers. I would like respond immediately. Like that's my.
I also ask for a glass of wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would bargain up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. It's like, sweeten this deal just a little bit. And just have a nice bottle of wine on the side, and we're good. We're good. I have no qualms.
Yeah. No, I would totally have.
Oh yeah, no, like nothing against that grad student whatsoever.
Oh,
like
no,
you do
not at all. You do you.
Yeah, and like the first cheating, I will say it was very sneaky. His cheating the first time or the second time, but the first cheating is like,
it was
I'm like, it took you like 20 rounds to figure out that guy's cheating because like.
Yeah, and also, Kevin Kline was the only guy that noticed that Emil Hirsch, every time he got a question, he like took 20 seconds to like look down into his toga.
Headmaster knew also is like, I need that donation from the.
Right.
I'm not saying anything.
D-back just had to look to his right. He would have been like, "Oh, dude."
Yeah. Okay. My other thing is I like in the second contest, I liked the question he asked because that was a question the whole class knew. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, the plaque, man, the plaque. I got really mad about how he caught him during the original contest because he tailored that question to
exactly.
Deepak.
Yeah,
like,
he knew it.
No one else would have necessarily known that. You could have asked any random question, but you asked one you knew he would know.
To be fair, how do you talk about Roman history without talking about Hannibal?
I don't know.
Well, also, one other thing.
He was on the wrong side of history, Laj.
Emil Hirsch wasn't in the classroom when they did the whole Šutruk-Nakhunte thing. It was
still
before
over
he got
the
there.
door the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that's like, I guess that's also like students who don't read my syllabus. It's like, it's literally been there the whole semester, guys.
Well, yeah, because they even like call out to him. He's like, it was over the door, man. Like, didn't you see it? Don't you remember reading it every day? Like they spent, 4 years in this room?
Mm-hmm.
And he never read it?
Well, take a second to just talk about the nature of the trivia and like trivia as education. Because
I hate it.
As education, yes. As a competitive person who used my noggin for things, Netflix has trivia crack episodes going right now, and I am all up on that. Like, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I love trivia, and I love winning at trivia, and I love rubbing it in people's faces when I win at trivia.
Mm-hmm.
My friends can attest.
I attest, yes.
I'm great fun to hang out with. But it becomes like there is like a pedagogical flaw where like, I mean, again, so much in the way that Kevin Kline's classroom is so, even though he's teaching in 1976, his classroom isn't like 1919.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where, it's just the memorization and recitation of facts and factoids. And the problem is like those become abstract. They just become like things that people memorize and repeat, but they don't like when a student says the Battle of Lake Tresemme is in 217 BCE. I'm not even sure if that's right. It's more or less, but like that doesn't mean anything to them. It has no like value. And like we talk in education of like a hierarchy of learning, and the baseline is just the ability to recite and remember. But like real education and thinking and teaching and learning happens when you're like, when you know what that means and you can start to like connect and create and analyze these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you like think about how many people actually died at the Battle of Lake Tresemme and think about what the reports of that did to the populace in Rome and the fear that went through the city and the sort of like the effect that had on the policies that came next. And like those are the connections. And like that's real history. Just
the causes and the effects. Which exactly. To his credit, the quizzes that lead up to the trivia contest seem to be evaluative questions. Like the questions that they were getting were like,
true.
What were the effects of the Gracchi's, policy on Roman Republic, which is like
which is basically what I answered on our like Roman history exam. Like that's a question we still ask today.
Yeah, it's a question that it has no singular simple answer. It's multivalent. It's like there's a lot of things you can, but it does rely on your knowledge. It relies on your knowledge of historical events and like cause and effects and things like that.
That's why I love archaeology courses and hate art history courses, which are almost the exact same thing, except there's such a huge hang up on dates and like individuals. And I definitely understand needing to understand the chronology and order of things. But like, I was so frustrated. It's like having to be within 50 years of the correct date for this particular statue or something. And like, I get, but for an archaeologist, it's all relative. It's like, everything feeds into everything else, and art influences culture. Art is part of culture, but like culture, they represent culture norms, and culture norms inform politics. Politics reinforces those. It all goes to hell when military things happen.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's just it. Is I want my students to know the dates for the conquest of central Mexico by the Spaniards, not because it's like you need to know those dates for the sake of knowing the dates, but because, all right, now let's look at our sources for those events. When did Cortez write? When was the Florentine Codex made? How does the year of production impact how that event is remembered? Like, that's what's important about dates. It's not
context.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't give multiple choice questions for a lot of my classes for that reason, because students can argue, and if they're good, they argue effectively. And like, you're right, this can't be just simplified by 4 possible choices of a correct answer.
Which is why I like making students argue, or like having students express their opinion. It's like, you feel this way about this material? Great. Tell me about it. Like, use your information that you have. Tell me everything that you know and why you feel this way.
Or yet, even why I think the Mean Girls analysis of Julius Caesar is one of the best pieces of pedagogy, because it's like she's connecting, Gretchen Wiener is connecting it to her own life, which is like the highest point. It's like, when you're seeing a connection between the events of Julius Caesar and what's going on in your high school social circle, that's a breakthrough, where it's like, yes, we should totally just stab Caesar.
Stab Caesar.
Which is like a similar thing is happening here, but like, I mean, I guess in Mean Girls, like the teacher is just like, what the hell is going on? But like, in this one, Kevin Kline is like, no, your analysis is wrong. Or it's just like Sedgwick, like, why do you think that?
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to say, it's like, can we bring it back to this point of, why are you using a William Shakespeare play?
A question about that. Like, what is their curriculum?
Because like, if you are... and I'm thinking 1976 is a little early for reception studies. Like, if you are discussing of this important turning point historical event in Roman history and how it has been reimagined over the years, and you're using that to demonstrate it, okay, that makes sense. But he's literally like, yes, this was Brutus's thought process as he was contemplating killing Caesar.
Yes.
And I'm like, no.
I mean, it's this larger problem of like certain people like Cicero, like Julius Caesar, like Shakespeare, just get like a pass of be like, these were the oracles of history or whatever. Like these, like, and like whatever I almost said Julius Shakespeare.
Well, just put it
I think should be like my stage name, Julius Shakespeare. I feel like would be a really good stage name.
Oh my God. No.
Oh, don't tell me you wouldn't go to see a performer named Julius Shakespeare.
You know I would.
No. It just reinforced the great, like, Western civilization got bandied about there a few times, and
his course was Western Civ. That was
well, and then but drawing a line from like, and I'm like, no, stop it.
Well, I don't know. I had to read Julius Caesar in high school, right? Like, doesn't everybody?
I've still never read it.
Really? I had to memorize Friend's Roman Countrymen. So like, actually recite it.
That's fun. Like, I almost see it as like a reception piece, and I know that that's not how they were using it, but Like, I think of today when we show our students like clips from HBO Rome.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing that because it's like a different view. And so I kind of like thinking about Shakespeare as like a different view of ancient history, you know, as a reception study.
Yes. Great.
I will say.
Great use of it. Not
Great
what he
use
was
of that.
doing.
Not what he was doing.
One of my favorite questions. Right now. I'm teaching a mythology course right now. We've entered into the epics, which is like the back half of my class. So we just did the Iliad last week. We're going to do the Odyssey and the Aeneid. And one of my favorite questions to ask students when we read just whatever Attic drama or ancient epics is like, who would you cast? And it changes sort of every year, but it's like who comes to mind? Like, what's the energy? What's the look? What's the feel? You know, and the secret correct answer to all of them is Danny DeVito, which I would totally love to see a Danny DeVito Achilles.
Every time I picture it, it just delights me more and more.
I would pay good money to see Danny DeVito as Achilles. But
I like that idea a lot. Apparently, so another Netflix show that is very popular right now, and it's a long-standing Japanese show that does like they're 6-minute shorts, and there's a tradition in Japan that before children go to school, because most students walk to school by themselves, is like they get their first errand where they have to like go outside the house and do something, and they're like 4 or 5 years old. And now I'm just kind of like, I want 5-year-olds doing the Iliad because I feel like that would work really well, actually.
You know what I'm reminded of? This is my memory went into a weird place. Sorry. So in A Bug's Life, there's a part where like the Boy Scout Girl Scout troop puts on like a dramatic reenactment of the bug battle, and it's like it's like incredibly violent, and like people are getting like dissected and like killing each other. Yeah, that would be like the kindergarten Iliad. Just
that is what I want.
A bunch of 5-year-olds like, and then the spear entered through the back of the mouth and came out the front, and his eyeball was attached to the tip of the spear.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Wait, can you just imagine the argument between Agamemnon and Achilles?
You're a sack of wine.
Okay, second to that,
dog face
is the Muppet version of the Iliad, which I would pay good
I want to see,
money.
like, I mean, I wonder what the violence quota is, or like what the Muppet stance is on violence. I feel like they're not a lot of violence.
Miss Piggy, you might just have to have a lot of Miss Piggy doing stuff.
Yeah. No, but
Muppet Treasure Island, there are sword fights.
Yeah, but nobody gets like their arm chopped off or anything.
Oh, I mean, fine, that's true.
That reminds me of another. I'm throwing so many shows out, but there is what is it called? Doom Patrol on HBO Max, which is another DC comic. And there's like one where Jane, who has dissociative disorder, and like all of her different personalities actually have different superpowers. So like half of what's going on is in her head with these other personalities. And at one point when like she's struggling, it's all puppets. Like she's realizing that like the main personality, the original person, is like they're all puppets for her to like act out these plays. And so you actually watch this very violent ripping apart of one of the puppets, and you're like, woo, that's a lot. And yet also comical for some reason.
So, I mean, Puppet Iliad is not a bad idea. I mean, there is an argument to be made that the violence in Homer is so intense, and it's so like, you know, people get like stabbed in all sorts of weird, gross ways, and it's like it could almost be read as like it's breaking, like, I guess, the Tarantino barrier, where it breaks over into revolting into just like comical almost.
I end up asking my students a lot if they think the poem itself was actually promoting war or was actually critical of it, just in terms of, you know, if you really unpack some of it and how violent it is and what people have to say.
I asked my students this exact same question because there was a film critic who, and I forget who said this, but they said to somebody the fact where it's like, I don't like war movies because all war movies are pro-war, even when they're ostensibly not, but they kind of are. Yeah. And I asked my students of like, do you think the Iliad, you know, because I mean, in a way, like, as history mets out, it kind of is, right? Because like Alexander goes to conquer Persia with the Iliad under his pillow, being like, I'm going to be Achilles. And we could say like, maybe is it this like a Fight Club situation where it's like you're taking away the wrong message, my bro?
Yeah.
Or
like Julius Caesar, sacrifices at the Troy or something.
Yeah.
He also did that because Alexander did that.
Exactly. He's like following in the footsteps of Alexander's. It's like, what message are we taking away from this?
Yeah, like one of my favorite things to point out is I think book 2 where, oh God, what's his name? The soldier that nobody likes.
Thucydides. I was just lecturing. I'm ready to talk Thucydides.
He literally presents the exact same argument that Achilles just did, and Odysseus beats the man down, and then all the other soldiers applaud. I'm like, yay, Odysseus, you're so great.
Here's a super hard flex. You know what Odysseus says? You don't get to talk that way to kings. That's exactly what he says. He's like, you don't talk to us that way. I know this because I was literally prepping, and I'm like, what does the Greek say? And I like popped it open. It's not that Thucydides' argument is like good or bad or whatever. It doesn't even matter. The fact that Thucydides is talking back to his social superiors is the real issue. And Odysseus says, like, if we're going to be kings, this aggression cannot stand, man.
Right.
It's not it.
Well, and that's my thing is like, and then everyone applauds. Everyone. Even though, like, most of those soldiers, like, this, I want to go home.
It's like that joke on the internet where people tell fake internet stories about the time they like told off their boss, and then like the sort of satirical responses, and then everybody clapped.
And they really clapped. No. I also think of it in terms of like, what is it? Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Like that movie is gross. There is a lot of disgusting, horrific violence.
Yeah.
People love that movie.
Yeah.
And do you think it has affected military enrollment?
Yes, in a positive way.
Or a movie like Zero Dark 30 or Hurt Locker or something like that.
I was going to think Hurt Locker was one I was thinking of. To be honest, I haven't seen any of them.
American Sniper, we're like
I had to watch Saving Private Ryan in my high school world history class.
Yeah. I remember the opening being played for Memorial Day when I was in middle school.
Oh,
and it was paired with this song.
No.
I'm proud to be an American.
I mean, I think we've gone a little far off field, but I really like where we're going. So
we're still talking education here.
No, that's right. Where it's like, I think in a way, like I think maybe the Iliad is like a movie like Saving Private Ryan, where like textually you could read this as an anti-war movie, right? Like everything is, there's so many scenes you can just pull out of Saving Private Ryan of like why this is bad and dumb and destructive. I'm thinking of like the scene where it's very early. It's right after the beach landing, and these two guys run up and they're like trying to surrender, and the American just like shoots them or something like that. And I think like there's an analysis where it's like the guys are actually speaking Polish, and they're basically saying something to the effect of like, we were drafted, like help us out. And the Americans just like shoot them, or like we don't like give a shit. Which like on the surface is like that's a very anti-war reading, but everything like Christy was just saying is like everybody watches Saving Private Ryan and they're like, yeah, World War II was the best.
Because we are a militaristic society. Like we just are. Like you have to buy into the system. The propaganda is to teach us. Like I have this discussion with my students about like, what is the one thing everyone remembers about Aztec culture? Human sacrifice. Oh my God, that's awful. It's terrible. Okay, when is human sacrifice acceptable in our society? Because it is. And it is very much framed in these settings where someone is trained to kill and or give up their life for the good of everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I wonder, is the Iliad is the same kind of way where like you can totally read the Iliad and be like, this is a diatribe against war, right? Because it's like you get so many scenes in the Iliad of like, Hector going to visit his wife and child, and the wife is like, and Andromache is like, Andromache is like, don't fight. All of my brothers have been killed by Achilles. You will be killed by Achilles. What will happen to me and my son after you're dead? Really bad things. And she's right on that account. And Hector, like, he can't even touch it. Like one of the better moments, I think one of the poignant moments of the Iliad is Hector tries to pick up his own son, and the son cries because Hector's wearing his helmet, and Hector has
Yeah.
to take his helmet off before he can pick up his own son, which is like, I feel like if ever there was a statement of like, maybe we shouldn't fight, like that was it.
Absolutely.
But again, Alexander the Great grows up reading the Iliad.
Mm-hmm.
Just, and then basically is like, you know what I want to do? Conquer the world. And
Yes.
then Julius Caesar,
Xerxes also,
deal.
Xerxes also gives sacrifice at the tomb of Achilles. And like, it's not just the Greeks and the Romans, but there's tons of cultures that have bought into that story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like today, it's like, I really unpack. It's like, you guys, let's read Achilles. Does he seem heroic to you? And yet that is how Brad Pitt has made us remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I don't know, this is like very, very far off base, but this is also the perfect opportunity for me to plug one of my very favorite fiction retellings of the Iliad, which I have like talked to Christy about 1,000 times.
And I finally read it too.
And you finally read it. Which is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which is a retelling of the Iliad from Briseis's perspective. And it is excellent in sort of just the representation of the various influences on war and survival, and is, I don't know, one of the more meaningful like retellings that I have ever read.
That is also like what I loved about that text is like there were moments in it where I felt like I was reading the Iliad, like I could hear the lines in the background almost, but like then her voice is coming over it and being like, as a female war prisoner sex slave, this is what it is.
Yeah. How did we get to this point?
I don't know.
I think we've all taught the Iliad this semester at some point, and we had feelings.
Now, I was teaching it like this very week, so it's like on the brain. I don't know how we actually got
semester. Yeah.
I don't know. No, teaching ancient history, teaching. Yeah. No.
Teaching. Is there a way to ethically teach Greek and Roman history?
That's what I think this conversation was. Is just like, what can we effectively teach with these old stories that are off the beaten path that Kevin Kline liked to lay out for all of his students? And we're all passionate about it. Like, we think there's so much here that is worth telling, that like, yeah, I can go to that senator and not be like, well, your whole government's based off it. I'm like, no. Here is why. Here's all. Sit down. I'm going to give you a 50-minute lecture like I do my other students.
Robert E. Lee's gun, which, by the way, the senator gives him.
That was a moment.
Oh God, that was horrifying. That was
when Kevin Kline goes to visit the senator. The first thing the senator does is hand him a pistol that presumably belonged to, was it Robert E. Lee's coachman? And Kevin Kline's just like playing around with the pistol while they're having their conversation, and like presumably a loaded gun, right?
Yeah,
well,
he
says
the
at some
senator's
point,
like,
he's like, yeah, he's like,
fire.
That still fires. And he's like, okay, just like
put it back on the table now.
that senator played like Dick Cheney so well. Like, I'm like, yep, there are definitely senators like that, and
there's one of these senators like that.
And like that's kind of why I was like, if the worst thing Sedgwick ever did was cheat on a history trivia quiz, I ain't mad.
Like I said, this was like a maybe in poor taste joke, but my first response when I was thinking about this movie is, this is the Brett Kavanaugh origin story of like, this is exactly the environment that produced a dude like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, he produced like so much of our government, right? Is old white men who came from exactly this background.
Yeah.
And you are great as long as you act like these great men who committed genocide and amongst many other things.
Oh God.
Stabbing their friends in the back. But for the good of for the good of the Republic. It's fine. It's fine.
Which is like, what does that even mean?
Well, and like, just to broaden out this problem, like we've been talking about this issue in the classroom, but in the world of this idea that if you model yourself off of what is believed to be great men, then you are a great man. And like, I think one of the best case studies of that is Vladimir Putin, who likes to have paintings of him as Heracles and shit like that.
It's like Stiller in Dodgeball, where he's like, that's me grabbing the bull by the horns.
Yes. Oh my God.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, Heracles is your role model?
No,
Man
it
who
makes
went
sense.
insane and slaughtered his wife and family? Really?
And no one acknowledges he cross-dressed as a woman and was a slave for a year. Like, no one wants to paint that part of it at all.
Christy, you just put into perspective to me like the whole like I remember years ago when like that first photo reel of like all of like the shirtless photos of him like fishing and riding a horse, and I'm like, I mean, like we knew what he was doing, but like the Heracles adds like a whole other layer to that.
Yeah.
He was pulling a Commodus.
He was.
Yeah.
He is currently right now pulling a
Yikes.
Commodus.
So yeah, I think we're like all on board of like hate this movie because it is putting Westerns, and I'm gonna say Western civilization in like a bad way here. It's like we're putting it on a pedestal because as long as you fall into this mold, you are great. And like that is why we have so many problems today. That is why, and that's what so much of us who are teaching ancient Mediterranean history or literature or whatever you want to call it, and just being like, no, these were bad systems and they existed, but there was good and there's fascinating and there's like that crazy Alcibiades guy who I still want a movie of. But not because it's like I think he was a great. I think just because his story is fascinating and human,
and frankly relatable. Yeah, human.
Yeah. Justice for Šutruk-Nakhunte. That's all I gotta say.
Justice.
Yeah. Well, and so I mentioned before that we were watching Ghosts of Rwanda for my class because we're on Rwandan genocide. And like there's a quote from Dallaire, who was in charge of the UN peacekeeping mission. And he mentions like talking to some of the men who had orchestrated the genocide, and he had noticed blood on their hands. And he said like, and in that moment, they weren't human to me anymore. They were, evil incarnate. And like, I actually hate because that is still dehumanization. And what it does is deny the truly like humanity is capable of greatness and it's capable of great evil. And like, it's still human. And so like the minute we categorize something as either on a pedestal or something as a devil or as evil, we remove ourselves from it and remove ourselves from the possibility that that can happen. And it does happen.
This is like the problem with like the way people talk about like Nazism, right? Because they like it becomes this like abstract evil that like, yeah, like you would be evil and obvious. And like, when like people who are like actual Nazis today out in the world like don't realize that they are like being Nazis and when ironically call other people Nazis.
Exactly. Yep.
That got too real for me for a second.
That's what happens when you talk about genocide.
Yeah, I feel like this movie like made me think about so many wider things and so many wider themes and issues than actually just this movie.
Yeah. I'm glad I watched this movie. Like I really am, because I'm angry, but it's because I'm thinking about my role as an educator of ancient Mediterranean world. Like what do I actually want my students to take away from this? What do I want to mold them into being? I don't know that I'm a molder per se, but
will not mold my son.
It's such like there were some things that were just so the question to begin with is like, what's the point of what you're teaching them? But also it's like with the anti-CRT stuff is like, oh, what are you doing to my child? I get to do this to my child. And
yeah.
I think Elijah, you suggested a damn landmine with this movie. I must say.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's a good conversation.
I'm casting about, or like we need to end on like a lighthearted note.
Oh, I know what to do. You mentioned it's like, what's the gimmick you open your semester with, or maybe the quote or something. So like, if you have one, or like, what would you consider doing?
Yeah, what's your Šutruk-Nakhunte move?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh God, I don't know. I'm
trying to think.
I have my favorite way I talk about the ablative of agent versus the ablative of means in my Latin class, which means nothing.
I think we might do a similar thing. And does it involve the game Clue?
It does not. No.
Okay.
Mine is, so agent versus means is like a person versus an object sort of being a part of the action being used for, I don't know how you describe the ablative.
The
in
means by
English
which you
anymore.
do something, I guess I see.
Yes, with which you do something. So agent versus means, a person versus an object. I use The Rock. Dwayne The Rock Johnson is the ablative of agent because he is a person. But if you are hitting somebody on the head with a rock, that is an object.
Oh, that's good. My go-to is you can get both in a game of Clue, where you want to say like Colonel Mustard was murdered by Mrs. Peacock with the knife.
Yep,
in the kitchen or whatever. You get all of your ablatives right there. He was murdered by Mrs. Peacock with the knife, ablative with the means, in the kitchen.
That's excellent. Should do like a time when or something in there.
Oh, you dead Midnight. Language people.
Get out of here. Get out of my house.
All right. Well, mine is I do two things. One is actually a game I do on the first day of classes, which is based, like, someone made this game based off the movie Mementos, which is like, apparently the storyline is a guy loses his memory every day he wakes up.
Wait,
so
you haven't seen Memento?
I haven't seen it, but
Christy.
Okay.
I'm like freaking out.
Well, I haven't seen Dead Poet Society either, so like judge me. I deserve it. So I do a game based off of that, which is to teach like what kinds of questions do historians ask in order to like try and, answer a question about the present, actually. So it's like these two people break up and you have all of these note cards with different bits of information, and like all you have is the information to begin with, and then you get like a chronology, and then you get like information of like who are our sources, and one of the sources is this individual who desires one of the people who broke up, and like they have some juicy information on the couple. So that's really fun. But I have a quote that I start with as well. It actually comes from Napoleon. History is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. And I like that because history is like, what does the majority agree upon? And there's bias and inaccuracies in any historical account we have, and that means we can also always challenge it with new information. So that's kind of it's like, Napoleon, damn it! Why do you have a good quote?
I got one. I know what I do. My first day of myth class, my move is the first myth I like to talk about in my mythology class is Daedalus and Icarus, and I start by just giving them the like rundown of like here's the plot of the myth vis-a-vis Ovid, and then I say, okay, here's 3 modern things that I think Daedalus and Icarus speaks to, and so the first one is Justin Bieber, and the second one is Jurassic Park, and the third one is the film Bao, by Domi Shi, who directed Turning Red.
Okay,
amazing.
So my line is like, so like these are like the ideas, like to introduce some of the ideas of like different ways you can read a myth. And so the Justin Bieber thing is like, we read it as a moral tale. It's like rise and fall situation. And Justin Bieber like particularly loves like angel imagery and like winged imagery. Like he shows up at his concerts all the times, like descending from the ceiling with like a set of wings. He's this fallen angel. Like he's like self-presenting himself as an Icarus kind of figure.
I'm also flashing back to Turning Red now, because that was like one of the aspects of the concert was of the boy band appears with angel wings.
Yeah, exactly. And like thinking about Icarus as like a moral tale, right? Mm-hmm. Is like, about like reaching too high, falling, things like that. Moral element. And then Jurassic Park, where there's this whole bit in Ovid where he says like when like Daedalus fashions this like unknown art to his son, and he like, we're breaking nature, and like, is flight not a thing that maybe we should be playing around with in the same way that like maybe we shouldn't be resurrecting dinosaurs? Are we breaking nature through technology? That idea. And then the third bit is Bao, which is the short film by Domi Shi, where basically a mother is overprotective of her child and then eats her dumpling son. And thinking about it as like a parent, a relationship between parents and children, where like, what's the relationship a parent should have to their child? Whereas like, does Daedalus give Icarus too much of a leash, and then he like destroys himself? Like, should we keep and the Bao is the opposite. Like, do I keep them so close that, they resent it, and then I destroy them through, trying to like, do you let them fly? Do you not let them fly? This
is why I don't have children right now. Because no matter what I do, they have to go to therapy.
So that's my opening. That's first day of mythology class with Colin.
I fucking love that.
And just the idea of like, you can use myth to think about like, these are all we can read modern media through the lens of myths and like the themes that are being played around with, and use them as like tools to think about these things. You know, it's almost like it's like a tool in your toolbox to use to find some kind of new meaning.
I love that.
That goes all the way back to like reading the Iliad and coming along with the wrong interpretation, or like, but that's just it. It's like anyone can read these and see it as a heroic story, or like I, always connect to that moment with Briseis being like, I'm taking this moment to weep for my family under the guise of weeping for this guy who is involved in my incarceration.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh man.
All right. Any closing words?
No.
I love what I do. It's like, I love teaching. I will say, I will end again on just the point that what I took away at the end that I liked was recognizing that as educators, we do have an impact on those we teach, and recognizing that power, I think, is really important, and like the harm and the good it can do. And
that the one failure does not necessarily define your...
Exactly. Yes.
Yep.
All right. So, cue the music. And you should just start writing these down. But I'm not gonna. I don't learn from my own mistakes.
My God, I have to pee. Hurry up.
So, yeah, thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed. As usual, you can find us at movieswedig.com and follow us at @digmovies on Twitter. As usual, please like, review, and subscribe us on any number of streaming services where you can find us on most of the major ones. And we'll be back next episode talking about, we have some actually good guests and movie ideas. We're branching a little further afield. We might be moving away from Greece and Italy into Egypt in exciting turns of events, and Mesoamerica. So stay tuned for future developments. Thank you, and bye.
Bye.